Let's explore compatibilism in Martin Luther King. First, let's review evidence of antagonism in Philosophy 225 readings, going back to Plato's Socrates. Next, we'll look at some examples of compatibilism in Martin Luther King, and we will learn Martin Luther King's solution to the debate between compatibilism and antagonism. And finally, to conclude, we'll consider the relevance of compatibilism for the good life. First, evidence of antagonism. Going back to Plato's Socrates, Socrates is accused of teaching what today are truths of science, and these truths of science are taken to conflict with the religion of Athens. In Transcendental Wild Oats and Hospital Sketches by Louisa May Alcott, our author talks about her objections to intellectual life, and in Hospital Sketches, our author reports that the scholarly chaplain at her hospital gave dry explanations of Bible stories, and for her this obstructed the formation of faith in herself and in the soldiers. An example of, or evidence of, antagonism. And in our recent authors, Pope St. John and this week Martin Luther King, 20th century science and technology are reported to cause anxiety and despair in human populations throughout the earth. This anxiety and despair clearly function contrary to faith and also hope. Our authors after Thanksgiving, Martin Heidegger and Joan Baez, also make these same reports from the 1960s, that science and technology and the developments from these, such as nuclear weapons, are causing significant anxiety and despair throughout the earth. In short, there is evidence of antagonism going back to the ancient world. Antagonism is defined as the view that reason and faith must conflict. However, many of our authors are championing compatibilism. How is this possible? How can we have both compatibilism and antagonism? We need to establish that compatibilism is true and that antagonism is in some sense false. Okay, let's now review examples of compatibilism in Martin Luther King. First, let's look at the very first page of Strength to Love. There's a nice summary by the editor. The editor writing, he, Martin Luther King, refused to accept the false dichotomy between folk and intellectual preaching. Keep in mind that Martin Luther King is providing sermons to African American communities in Alabama and in Georgia. Many persons in his flock may not have had any education. As you read Martin Luther King, you find that his preaching indeed is intellectual, and our editor says he refused to distinguish preaching to ordinary folk and providing an intellectual sermon. Like Pope St. John's Peace on Earth, the sermons of Martin Luther King are compatibilism through and through. There are arguments, there are references to philosophical authorities like Aristotle and Hegel. There are references to 20th century science, particularly psychology and psychiatry. And along with these, of course, are explanations of articles of faith and quotations from sacred scripture. Let's look at two specific examples. Again, on the very first page of Strength to Love, on page 491, Martin Luther King refers first to a French philosopher and also to the philosopher Hegel, who is a German philosopher in the 19th century. And both of these philosophers came to a similar conclusion that opposites can combine to create a more powerful whole. And then Martin Luther King notes a similar truth is found in sacred scripture. Reading on page 491, Jesus recognized the need for blending opposites. And we've looked already at the passage or the quote from the sacred scripture where the Son of God proposes that the disciples may be both like snakes and also like doves. So a truth that philosophers have reached is also a truth found in sacred scripture. In short, an article of faith. A powerful statement of compatibilism is found on page 493. There's a paragraph here in which Martin Luther King expresses compatibilism. I'm reading now in the middle of the paragraph on 493. Science deals mainly with facts. Religion deals mainly with values. The two are not rivals. They are complementary. Science keeps religion from seeking into the valley of crippling irrationalism and paralyzing obscurantism. Religion prevents science from falling into the marsh of obsolete materialism and moral nihilism. Science, an area of reason, and religion, including faith and articles of faith. So a statement there that reason may support faith, faith supports reason. Let's now learn the solution to the compatibilism-antagonism debate. First, something to notice. Reason refers to a human power. Reason is a synonym for the intellect, the mind. Faith, on the other hand, is a virtue. So reason and faith aren't, in a way, the same category of thing. One is a power, which includes many activities and virtues, and faith is one specific theological virtue. So to really look at a conflict or agreement between faith and reason, it'd be better to specify a specific area of reason. For example, scientific observation and scientific evaluations, in contrast with faith. And indeed, most of the evidence of antagonism is between a specific area of reason, scientific reasoning, scientific observing, in contrast with faith. When Martin Luther King discusses tough-mindedness and tender-heartedness, he argues that some science today has bad habits. Some scientists lack a tender heart, he says, and in short are hard-hearted. They have the bad habit. They're not able to relate to others. Other people don't matter to them. And at the same time, some scientists are overly skeptical. The result is a science which depersonalizes human life, says Martin Luther King. Our author, Martin Luther King, proposes that in addition to being tough-minded, we need to be also tender-hearted. Tender-heartedness balances out our intellectual virtue and makes us well-rounded. This observation is very promising. For Martin Luther King, antagonism between scientific reasoning and faith is a result of bad habits on the part of experts. If we have the virtue, if we have intellectual virtues like tough-mindedness and virtues like tender-heartedness, then our science and faith will be compatible with each other. So that's the explanation and solution to the debate. Antagonism is a result of bad habits, and compatibilism is a result of having the virtues. Let's now conclude by considering how compatibilism contributes to our examination of good life. According to Martin Luther King, science provides some account of human happiness and human well-being. However, science by itself might depersonalize human life. We might, if we depend only on science, we will understand life in terms of biochemistry, for example. Faith, on the other hand, brings things like mystery and hope into the story of human life. So we should value compatibilism because truths of faith and truths of science provide a more rich account of human life. Also, according to Martin Luther King, human life has variation. Human life isn't simply one enduring moment from birth to the very end. Any human life undergoes changes. Some of those changes are failures or tragedies. At times, scientific truths help solve our problems, says Martin Luther King. On other occasions, articles of faith assist us in solving our confusion and solving our problems. So, compatibilism helps contribute to the complexity of any human life.